Hey math kids, today we're going to talk about the unit circle, and we're in chapter 8, section A. There are no examples in this section, but I just wanted to talk about a few things that are in this section. So the unit circle looks like this. It gets its name because it has a radius of 1 or 1 unit. So this would be 1, this would be 1, this would be negative 1, and this would be negative 1. Okay? The center is at 0, 0. And if we're rotating around, if we go counterclockwise or anti-clockwise, as your book states it, it's actually the positive direction. So that is how we're going to be rotating around most of the time. Now, if sometimes we'll rotate around backwards, which is actually clockwise, that would be the negative direction. So once again, counterclockwise or anti-clockwise is positive, and clockwise is negative. Some other things to think about: if we let's see, what do I want to talk about? Let's just talk about sine, cosine. We've already talked a lot about. You can read in the book if you want to go over that again, but it's just the same idea as SOHCAHTOA. I guess we do extend it a little bit. So I'm going to do something there. Oh, I guess they did do it in the book. So if we have a point right here, x comma y, we create a right triangle right there. We and we think of this as theta. We can do our sine, cosine, and tangent from there. And so sine of theta is opposite. So this side would be the y, and this side would be the x. So the opposite is y divided by the hypotenuse, which is a radius, which is 1. It's a radius of the circle. And so that means sine of theta on a unit circle is always y. Similar thinking, we can say cosine theta is equal to x over 1, so it's always x. So cosine is always x. So if we come back to this as x comma y, that's the same as saying cosine comma sine. So we'll get more into how to use that, but that's a good thing just to keep in mind. Your book also states that sine and cosine need to be in between negative 1 and 1. The graph of sine looks like this, and the max value is 1, and the minimum value is negative 1. So you are never able to get a y value out of it that is bigger than 1 or negative 1. And we actually see this a lot more when we look at the inverse. So if we're taking inverse cosine of 5, which is a number that is outside of that range, that's going to be undefined. It has to be a number between 1 and negative 1. Okay? That's true for sine and cosine. Even though this was a sine theta graph, a cosine looks very similar. Cosine looks like this. And has the same thing, 1 to negative 1. The way cosine and sine are related to each other are like this. So cosine is 180 minus theta, or I guess that's not what it's doing. Okay, sorry. So cosine of 180 minus theta is just going to be negative cosine theta. And we can see that on the graph. So if we just look at cosine right there, it's all the way at 1. But then if we go 180 degrees, which would be to here, we get the opposite value. So we had 1, we go to negative 1. This isn't only true for those two values, but I think those are the easiest to see. Now if we have sine of 180 minus theta, we actually get sine. So we can see the same thing here. sine is 0 at this point, we go 180 degrees. And see how we have the same value of 0. Okay. All right. I think that's all I'm going to talk about in this video. If you need additional help, please come to Math Lab and Calculator.